Mute so we can now start the presentation that we're here for today, which is regarding pre-CAS interviews and also the pre-CAS compliance process. So first of all, thank you all for joining. Obviously, I understand that you're taking time out of your day to be here. So just what we're going to be going over in this session. So first of all, we're just going to quickly go through some of the new and upcoming changes in our pre-CAS interviews and our CAS request processes. Then we'll be talking about what makes a pre-CAS interview either a pass or a fail, what the kind of things we're looking for. We'll then be looking at some case studies on both pre-CAS interviews and visa refusals. So we'll be looking at the pre-CAS interview answers that we've been receiving quite often and breaking down some of the issues with some of those answers. And likewise, we'll be looking at some of our visa refusals, where this is an example of what UKVI is receiving, and this is an indicator of what they are not satisfied by. We'll then also be quickly going through the processes regarding administrative reviews and also our CAS request processes and document checks. Okay, and there will be time for questions in between sections of this presentation. So if you have any questions, whenever you think of them, just drop them in the chat box and I will be looking at them in due course. However, we won't be pausing for every question that comes in. Okay, so first of all, looking at what's new in QA. So as Hamid's already mentioned, we have a new university partner. We have the University of South Wales that's offering pathway programs for our undergraduate degrees. So that will be International Foundation Programs and International Year 1. We have new team members. So for conducting pre-CAS interviews in the UK, we have Christina, who has recently joined our team. And we also have new team members in our India team as well. And I'm sure for those of you who work directly with our India team, they will have already been introduced to you. Also a development on the CAS request processes. So the CAS Shield portal that we have been using for Ulster University for the past year now, we will now be expanding that platform and we will be using it for Solent University pathway programs and the University of South Wales. We do also plan to be using this for the University of Roehampton. However, that is still to be finalised and confirmed. Hopefully that confirmation will be coming to you hopefully later on this month. Okay, so we've also made some changes in the pre-CAS interviews themselves over the past few months. So recently we've increased our focus on the student sources of funding and the financial evidence that they will be using for their visa applications. So students are expected to explain how much money is available to them in those bank accounts that they will be using for their visa applications. And we want to know, as always, where that money is coming from. Students are now also going to be asked how much money is available and how long they've had it in their account for. And students will also be asked how their deposit payment was made to the university. The reasons why for that I will be going over in the following slides. Students converting from one subject area to another need to be able to justify their decision to study in a new subject area, how it benefits them, and what makes them feel ready to take on that new subject at degree level. Now, the reason for this is because a few months ago, we received an update from UKVI in terms of a kind of a summary of what they saw throughout 2020. And one of the things that surprised us in 2020 was that they are concerned with a very high proportion of business studies applicants are coming from different fields of study. So they are concerned that potentially students are using business degrees, even though they may not specifically have an interest in the business field. So that's why, because UKVI have been much more concerned about this lately. So that's why we're now increasing our focus on that during the pre-CAS interviews. Applicants with previous immigration history in any country will be expected to provide more detail. This applies to both visas granted and refused. So if they've had any visas successfully granted or refused for any country throughout their lifetime, not just over a 5 or a 10-year period, then we want the students to be able to tell us about all of them. So what type of visa they were applying for or which type of visa they received, what was the purpose of their travel to any of those countries, and how long they stayed in any of those countries for. And also, finally, students will continue to be questioned on their awareness of the UK's coronavirus rules and restrictions. Now, obviously, we are approaching June 21st, and hopefully, depending on the situation in the UK, that should be further lifting of restrictions, particularly on people already within the UK. However, the travel restrictions for overseas applicants, those travel restrictions are still going to apply. Particularly, we're aware, obviously, with the majority of South Asia is now on the UK government's red list. And that does mean that when those applicants are traveling to the UK, they need to follow the tightest of restrictions. So they have to quarantine in a government-approved hotel for 10 days or more, depending on whether they test positive for coronavirus or not. They will also be required to undergo coronavirus tests, both before traveling and also during their isolation periods. So we need to make sure that the students are familiar with these rules and prepared to follow them once they arrive in the UK. Now, a little bit more on COVID-19 and how that's impacting our business moving forward and how it's going to be impacting our students as well. Now, online enrollment, which is what has been available for just over a year now, we will not be running online enrollment for the September 2021 intake. Now, the exact teaching plans in regards to online and classroom-based learning are still under review, but we are working under the expectation that by September, the UK government guidance will require at least partial attendance on campus, possibly combined with online learning. It's going to depend on the social distancing rules and requirements and potentially the choices of each university as well. However, we are expecting that for the courses in September 2021, we are expecting the students to be able to arrive in the UK by that point. So students will be expected to arrive in the UK at the time of starting their course, even if they're coming from a country on the red list for international travel. So that means that hotel quarantine is highly likely to still be mandatory to the majority of your students when they arrive in the UK. And we need to make sure that the students are prepared for this. So if any of your students have any concerns or doubts over their willingness or their ability to travel to the UK in September, if there's any doubts, then they should not be requesting a CAS, simply because what we have been seeing lately is a large number of students who have been withdrawing their applications after they have received a CAS and even after they have enrolled online. And obviously that's something that we need to limit, because we need to reduce the amount of CASs that are being effectively wasted by students not using them. And there are also visas being wasted by students not traveling to the UK because they don't want to go through the red list hotel quarantine requirements. So if there are any students who have any reservations or any doubts, or they don't want to go through the hotel quarantine, then they should not be requesting a CAS until it's confirmed that their country is going to be removed from the UK's red list. Okay, so moving on to pre-CAS interviews, which is obviously the main subject that we're going to be covering today. So first of all, why do we conduct pre-CAS interviews? So, well, credibility is the most common reason for visa refusals in regions that are considered high risk by UKVI. Now, this includes some of QA's key markets, such as India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Vietnam, and Pakistan. So we've consistently seen that those are the highest risk areas for visa refusals, especially due to credibility. So that's why we conduct the pre-CAS interviews. Our goal with every pre-CAS interview is to ensure that every student that we grant a CAS to has the best possible chance of obtaining their visa and minimizing their risk of visa refusal. So the pre-CAS interview is not about rejecting students. It's not about, rejecting a student because we don't like them or because we don't want them. We want to accept every single student that we can. However, the only time that we will be rejecting students at the pre-CAS interview stage will be if we cannot be confident that if the student was to be interviewed by UKVI, we need to be confident that the student would be able to succeed in that interview. Now, since introducing pre-CAS interviews in 2018, our visa refusals due to credibility in the South Asia region have dropped by more than 7%. So obviously it's a very effective process. It's really helped us. That's important because QA doesn't have its own license to sponsor international students. We use our university partners' licenses, and it's vital that we don't jeopardize those licenses. So whilst a sponsor with a license is, they have a maximum limit of 10% of all visas refused before their license is at risk. However, because it's not our license, we can't risk going anywhere near that 10%. Our targets are always going to be much, much smaller than 10% for our visa refusal rate. And that's also because a high visa success rate actually helps QA appeal to new potential university partners, such as the University of South Wales. And that's going to lead to more products being available and more opportunities becoming available for your future students. So it's very important for us that we have a high visa success rate, because the better our visa success rate is, the more appealing we are to new university partners. We also need to make sure that we're accepting students that will complete their course. So course enrollment rates and course completion rates, they are just as important to our university partners as the visa success rate. I know Hamid's already mentioned today regarding Solent University, where there has been an unsatisfactory level of students who have not been progressing throughout their course and from their foundation program into their bachelor's degrees. So it's very important that when we are recruiting students, that we are recruiting students who are going to be making that progress. Okay, so who needs a pre-CAS interview? Now, pre-CAS interviews are compulsory for any student of the following nationalities applying from outside of the UK. That includes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Nigeria, Ghana, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Now, that's not the entire list, that's just the list that makes it compulsory. Students from a nationality not in that list, they may still need an interview, but it will depend on their academic profile and their immigration history. So, and this is based on nationality, not the country in which they're applying from. So, for example, if they are an Indian student applying from outside of the UK, but a different country to India, they are treated as an Indian applicant, and therefore they are still required to take a pre-CAS interview. So who doesn't need a pre-CAS interview? So students who are applying from within the UK, they are going to be exempt from the pre-CAS interview process. Any student from a country recognised as low risk by UKVI, they are now going to be exempted unless there is cause for concern in their academic or immigration history. So the full list of countries can be found at the link that I put in the slide. Obviously, these slides will be shared with you in due course. So that's your reference point for if you want to check if a student is exempt from a pre-CAS interview based on their nationality. Now, if a student has passed a pre-CAS interview and then deferred their application, then their pre-CAS interview will be carried forward for up to 6 months. So, for example, if a May intake applicant who passed their interview would not need to take another pre-CAS interview for the September intake, but they would need to take a pre-CAS interview again if they were then deferring again into the following January intake, because we will be reaching a point where it's been more than 6 months between the student taking their pre-CAS interview and being processed for a CAS for the next intake. So that's why it's very important. We just feel like it's important that the pre-CAS interview is fresh in a student's mind at the time of applying for their visa, because it does help prepare them. So obviously, if more than 6 months have passed, then we just want to make sure that the student's interview performance is still at the standard they were at when we passed them previously. Okay, so what makes a student credible? So we have a few different factors for assessing a student's credibility, which are highlighted at the top of the page. And those are motivation, research, progression, competency, funding, and their immigration history. So going through each of those factors, first of all is motivation. So some of the questions that are focusing on motivation will be, why has the student chosen to study abroad outside of their home country? why has the student chosen a particular course? What are they going to be benefiting from their choice of course and their choice of university? What are they planning to do in the future? So that again just ties into the benefits of studying the course. So for motivation, personalization is key in this area. We are looking to see what is important to the student and what their priorities are. So obviously, the student making their answer as personal as possible is what we look for there. The next element is research. So we're looking at what other options did the student have available to them? How much information did they gather before making this decision? Obviously, for many students, in terms of the level of financial commitment that they're making, this is probably going to be the second or third largest financial commitment that the students will ever be making. Obviously, the cost of studying in the UK, if they're studying, say, for example, a 2-year postgraduate program in London, then that's potentially costing them in excess of £20,000 per year. So if they're going to be spending upwards of £40,000, then that's going to be a massive financial commitment. And we want to make sure that the students have taken this decision very seriously. And obviously making sure that they understand the importance of their choice and making sure that they are well informed themselves in making that decision. So the next element is progression. So we're looking at what qualifications does the student already have? What does this course offer to them that they don't already have? And how is this course going to be relevant to what they do next in their future? So we're looking to see how this course is going to be filling a gap between the student's past and their future. Obviously, if the course doesn't appear to fit in that gap, then that's something that's going to be much more of a concern. Now, the next part is competency. So we'll be looking at what do students already know about this subject area? Will they be capable of completing their course? And is their level of English going to be good enough to handle both their studies and also an interview? So obviously the interview is going to be a one-to-one conversation. We are asking questions and engaging with the student in taking on board their answers. Now, if the student is unable to understand the questions that are being asked of them, then it will cast doubt on whether they will be able to understand the course content that's being taught to them in a classroom environment where they are not going to be one-to-one with their lecturer all of the time. In some cases, they will be in front of a lecturer along with dozens of other students. And in that kind of situation, if the student isn't understanding, then that's something where they're going to really struggle with their studies. So that's why their level of English and their ability to communicate is very important during the interview process. The next part is funding. So we're looking at where is the money coming from to pay their tuition fees and their living costs. We're looking at how much money is available on their bank statement and whose bank statement they are using. And we will also be looking at, will they have more money available to them once the amount of money in their bank account runs out? So, for example, if a student is studying a foundation program followed by 3 years of bachelor studies, obviously they only have to show on their bank statement enough money to cover the first year. But we still need to, from a credibility perspective, make sure that their source of funding is going to be able to see them through for the full 4 years that they're going to be studying. And then we also look at, is this source of funding legitimate and realistic? Now, that part is very important for 2 reasons. So the first reason is obviously for ourselves as QA Higher Education, we are a business, we make money through the tuition fees. And obviously that's also how, as agents, you make your commission as well. So it's very important for us from a business perspective that we're confident the students are going to be able to pay their remaining fees once they've got their visa. However, the other reason that this is very important is also from a legal perspective. Now, because of anti-money laundering laws in the UK, it's very important for us as a business that we are not being used as a route for money laundering. So we need to make sure that any source of funding that the student has is not coming from basically any kind of illegal means. So that could be anything from organized crime to tax evasion or tax fraud, any of those kind of financial crimes. It's very important that we make sure that we're not accepting any money that's coming from that kind of background. So the final part is immigration history. So we'll be looking at, has the student applied anywhere else before? Have they been to the UK before? Have they been refused a visa anywhere for any reason? And have they worked overseas before? Have they studied overseas before? And do they have any existing ties to persons already living in the UK? Now, obviously, that's all very important because it all ties into, does the student have any alternative reason for wanting to be in the UK? Also, have they applied unsuccessfully somewhere else? We just need to know if they were unsuccessful. We need to know the reasons why they were not successful. Obviously, there are some reasons that are understandable and that will not be of hindrance to the student. However, if the student has been refused due to, for example, providing fake documents or giving false information on a visa application, then those are typically the kind of circumstances where we would not be wanting to move forward with those students. So if a student has a previous visa refusal, it doesn't mean that that's the end of their application. It just means that we need all of the information available on that visa refusal so that we can make an assessment and determine whether the student is at risk of further visa refusals. So anytime a student has a previous visa refusal, please let us know as soon as possible. Ideally, we should know at the initial application stage. However, if it's something that isn't declared until pre-CAS interview stage, then in most circumstances, it won't cause the student to be rejected. It will depend on our assessment of that refusal and whether it affects their risk of further refusals. Also, if students conceal their immigration history or if they don't declare any immigration history when asked, and that later results in a visa refusal, then that counts as providing false information to us. And if a student provides false information to us, then that actually voids their eligibility for any refund of their tuition fee deposit. So providing fake documents or providing fake information or false information at any point during the application process, that voids their eligibility for a refund, and it means that they essentially risk losing their deposit. So it's very important that students are upfront about their immigration history, especially. Okay, so those are the different factors of credibility. So now, what are we looking for when we conduct our pre-CAS interviews and when we're conducting these assessments of these candidates? So first of all, what we're looking for is unique and personal answers, because it's very difficult for a student to prove a genuine interest in their studies if they can't explain in their own words why it matters to them. And that same thing applies to everything behind their motivation for their studies and for their choices. So we're looking for the students to say in their own words what matters to them. The next part is direct answers. So if a student can't give a clear and direct answer to a question that they are being asked, then it indicates that they didn't understand the question that is being asked of them. So that's why it's very important that, say, for example, if I was to ask a student why they chose to study in the UK, then I would expect the student to be talking about the benefits of studying in the UK. I wouldn't be expecting them to be talking about the subject of their degree or maybe talking about the drawbacks of studying in any other countries. You know, the question is about the UK, so that's what the answer needs to be about. The next part is honesty. So a student's body language and their tone of voice are key indicators of whether someone can be potentially lying or telling the truth. So speaking honestly is essential for us because it helps them enhance their body language and it makes them more convincing within the interview of their genuine interests in studying. So we're looking to make sure that the student is not giving any contradicting answers, as that's another key indicator of dishonesty. So if a student provides two answers and one answer contradicts another, then at least one of those answers, if not both of those answers, are potentially not true. We're also looking for no evasive answers. So this kind of falls as well into the subject of direct answers, but also if a student is not explaining their answer clearly, if they are trying to avoid answering the question by attempting to change the topic of discussion or talk about something not related to the question being asked, then that is something that will be an area of concern for us, because it will suggest that either they don't want to answer because their honest answer is potentially not true, or sorry, their honest answer is something that we potentially don't want to hear, or it could be that they don't understand the question. And we're looking for positive body language. So just as body language can indicate dishonesty, it can also help students show themselves as both passionate and enthusiastic about their studies. Now, I do understand that sometimes when coming into these interviews, students can be very nervous. So I do understand that that will sometimes affect their body language in a way that could potentially undermine their body language in terms of credibility. We do look out for that. And, if a student is nervous, then, they can just say so. And I think that's another benefit to having the pre-CAS interviews, is that obviously as well, if you also have your own practice interviews with the students before coming to us, then that practice should help the student build that confidence, because then when they're facing the question, they know how to respond. That really helps in building a student's confidence. Whereas the less experience that the student has in answering these questions, the more nervous they are going to be when they are facing that in an interview, and their future with the university depends on how they answer. Obviously, it's a very high pressure situation, and we need to ensure that the students can perform well under that pressure. And practice goes a long way to benefiting them with that. So those are the things that we're looking for. So now, why are the reasons that so many students fail? Now, one of the most common reasons for a student failing a pre-CAS interview can be that they didn't do enough research. So when students show little or no research being conducted into realistic alternative choices, we're not expecting the students to give us a small essay on why they've made their decision and what comparisons they've made. We're just looking for students to show that they've taken their decision seriously by looking at other options and making a decision based on what's important to them. And that's the key point, is it's about what's important to them. So for example, if a student is choosing a university and what is important to them is the overall ranking of the university, then when they choose their university, we'd be looking for them to choose the university with the best available ranking, but also we'd be looking for their alternative choices to be of a similar ranking. Something that happens very commonly is students will be talking about 3 different university options, perhaps, where they have chosen, say, for example, Northumbria University or Ulster University, and then the other universities that they've researched, their only comparison is based on ranking, and those universities may be 50, 60, even 70 places further down in the rankings. Now, for a student to say that ranking is important, but then their only other choice is to be so far below, obviously that's going to be a big area of concern, because then that suggests that actually, if the ranking was important to them, then why did they not look for other universities with a similar ranking to the university that picked them? Scripted and copied answers. This is a very big problem, and it's an automatic fail. And when we keep recordings of our interviews, and if we see multiple students giving identical answers to one another, then it's a very clear sign that the students are not giving their own honest views. They are just repeating something that someone has told them to say, thinking that it's the right answer. And these interviews are not about right and wrong answers. It's about whether the student convinces us that they are genuinely interested in studying or not. So it's not about saying they've given a wrong answer. Obviously, they can give answers that have factual errors, and those will be wrong, obviously, but the reason why we would be failing them for that is not because they made a factual error, it's because it proves the student didn't do their research. So students giving contradicting answers, obviously that's a sign of potential dishonesty. And some students, they don't show a clear benefit from their qualification. For example, if they can't demonstrate academic progression over their previous studies, or sometimes there's very little financial benefit from obtaining the qualification. So say, for example, a student may be applying for a foundation program followed by a 3 years bachelor's degree. That's 4 years of study, and that's potentially going to cost them up to £80,000 in total across a period of 4 years. Now, in those circumstances, obviously we'd be looking to see within what kind of time period are they expecting to be able to recuperate that £80,000 investment. And if it's going to take them their entire lifetime, then it would not be seen as a realistic or a reasonable financial benefit. But then we move on to unrealistic answers. So this is especially common in expected future earnings and sources of funding. So obviously, if a student is saying that in the future they've picked a certain career path, and then they start talking about job descriptions and job titles, and they talk about the salaries that may be available, if those salaries are not within a certain range of what we check to be an industry average, then that's going to be seen as an unrealistic answer. Obviously, if, say, for example, they say that they want to be an assistant manager in an IT company such as Google, for example, I think in perhaps India as an example, then we know what we can research how much that company offers in salaries. And if the student's claim is that actually they'll get double what we're seeing from our own research, then that will be seen as an unrealistic answer. And when it comes to fact checking, particularly on these kind of areas, it is something that when UKVI interview a student, they will conduct that kind of fact checking. The final one is a lack of ambition. So this is particularly common in students that give very vague future career plans, which don't appear to show that their career plan has been seriously considered when making their choice of course. So, for example, a student has chosen to study a business course, and when we ask them about their future career plans and what they want to do, sometimes all they say is they want to work for a multinational company as a manager. And obviously that's a very vague statement to make, because multinational companies could be anything across any industry or sector. And also, a manager could be anything within an organization. So it's very inaccurate. Okay, so let's take a quick break for seeing any questions that have come in via the chat. So let's just quickly check. Right, okay, so one question that's coming through the chat is the pre-CAS interview and compliance interview results are announced 10 days later or more, which causes huge trouble for students as they've lost valuable time to find their second option. Could you please address these things? Okay, so in regards to the compliance interviews, they are not conducted by our team, so they do fall outside of our control. So unfortunately, we can always pursue those whenever you feel maybe perhaps after more than 2 or 3 days, if you're not hearing a result, then that's something you can pursue through your account manager. If you've had a student who's had a pre-CAS interview and not received their results within 2 days, then you can email me directly and I will investigate those cases further. Okay, let's see, any other questions? Okay, so it means students from Cambodia do not need to do a pre-CAS interview, am I correct? So the majority of Cambodian students would not be required to conduct a pre-CAS interview. They would only be asked to conduct a pre-CAS interview if we had any cause for concern within their documentation. So if we knew they had any previous immigration history, or if we knew they had any concerning academic history, such as, say, for example, if they had previously studied in the UK and not completed their course, that's the kind of circumstance where we may request a pre-CAS interview. However, it's not going to be an automatic pre-CAS interview just because of their nationality. Afghanistan is not mentioned here. That's mainly because Afghanistan is not covered by the South Asia region. However, that is a country that is considered high risk by UKVI. So for that reason, if you were to send us any applicants from Afghanistan, then we would be conducting a pre-CAS interview for those students. After a successful pre-CAS interview, how many days does it take to issue a CAS? So we'll go over the pre-CAS, or we'll go over the CAS request process later on in the presentation, because obviously it's not just about the pre-CAS interview, but there are also documents that need to be submitted in order for a CAS to be processed. And the CAS processing time does vary depending on the university partner. My email ID, that will be shared at the end of the presentation. So please bear with us. You will have my email address shortly. Is it mandatory for students to pay the fees before the interview? So yes, basically. We do require students to pay their deposit before taking the pre-CAS interview, simply because, for one, if we were to conduct pre-CAS interviews just for any student that had an offer, then we would not have the capacity to do that. So that's why we conduct pre-CAS interviews for applicants only who have paid, because then we know that they have committed to their choice with us. So I hope that answers your question. When will CAS issuance start for the September intake? So those dates will hopefully be confirmed before the end of June. However, I don't have the exact dates per partner yet. We typically, on average, we aim to start processing CASs 3 months before the course start date offered in or mentioned in the student's offer letter. So if you check your student's offer letter, if you see that it's less than 3 months to go before their course start date, then contact us, send us through the student's documents, and we will try and get that CAS processed for you. When explaining about the university, apart from the ranking, what other things can students say? Can you please explain once again? Okay, so we're going to be going through some pre-CAS interview case studies next. There will be a question on that topic, so hopefully I will be answering that question during that part. Will we be able to get pre-CAS interview questionnaires? So if you ask your account manager, we do have a list of the questions that are asked during a pre-CAS interview. They will be able to provide that to you. Now, that is for your internal use only. We do ask that you do not share the full list of questions with the students, obviously, because what we don't want to do is for students to go and start preparing scripts. Now, if the student completed their CAS shield, how many days does it take to issue the CAS? It depends on how busy the university is at the time. So obviously it depends on the demand. So sometimes during the intake, it'll be much quicker than others. Typically, we do see the processing time slow down towards the end of the intake and as we get closer to the CAS deadline, simply because that's when the volume of CAS requests coming in all at once increases. How risky is a married student with kids, and what answers are expecting universities for students' credibility? So obviously, if a student is planning on bringing dependents, then that does potentially raise a concern. However, what we will basically be looking at is how many dependents are coming, is the level of funding sufficient to cover the costs of looking after those dependents? Are they going to be able to fund themselves through the source of funding, or are they going to be relying on working within the UK? Those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. And also, if a student is bringing their children, then we're going to look to make sure, do they have childcare or schooling arranged, depending on the age of the children also. Are students going for international year one and students going for bachelor's joint CAS required to show the same amount of funds for visa purpose. So yes, if they're studying a bachelor's degree, then which is 3 years in duration, they would only be required to show the living costs and the remaining fees for the first year. And so obviously that would be the same with the international year one as well. Okay, how can we get the PowerPoint slides for future references? So they will be shared with you either later this afternoon or tomorrow. They will be sent to you via email. Okay, so UKVI sometimes says in some refusal reasons you have not approached the intended company you're going to be working for, but saying information so they think that they're not a genuine student. But students aren't going to be going to a company to get recruited 2 or 5 years in advance. I do agree with you on that, and that is quite an unfair point for an entry clearance officer to refuse a student on. However, I think if the student can simply demonstrate that they have still researched their career path, I think then that should be okay. If that was to come up in a refusal with very few other concerns around the student's credibility, then that's probably the kind of thing that we would suggest appealing on an administrative review, which is something that we'll go over later on in the presentation. The maximum number of attempts in pre-CAS failure, please. So, I mean, typically we don't have a set number on how many attempts we are going to give any specific student. Typically, if a student has failed 3 times, they are highly unlikely to ever get more than that. However, that doesn't mean that every student is going to be guaranteed 3 attempts. Some students, if they have performed very badly in their first attempt and then made no improvement on their second attempt, then those are the circumstances where sometimes we won't even allow a 3rd attempt, because simply, obviously, the number of interviews that we have to conduct, it's a very time-consuming process. And with the limitations that we have on our team, we want to ensure that we are using our time in the most effective way possible. So obviously, for us, is in the same time that we conduct 3 pre-CAS interviews for a student who fails all 3 times, at the same time, we could have, during those time slots, we could have had 3 other students who all passed first time. So instead of losing 1 student, we could have gained 3 more. So we have to balance the demand and the assessment of the student to determine whether it's the right choice of our time and resources to give the student another opportunity. However, if you ever have any debates or if you ever disagree with the result of a pre-CAS interview, then you can take that to your account manager, and obviously we can then discuss that in further detail and look at what other options may be available. Some in-country students looking for a change of university from other pathway providers. Could you please kindly explain the process? The best thing to do on that would be to contact your account manager. Application deadline, payment deadline, and CAS deadline for September intake. That was covered at the start of the presentation. So the application deadline is June 27th, and the payment deadline is July 31st. The CAS deadline has not yet been confirmed for each of our university partners. So unfortunately, I cannot confirm the CAS deadlines for you at this time. If any applicant fails in a pre-CAS interview, how many times can we ask for another? So I've just answered that question. I hope that was sufficient for you. What is the minimum deposit amount for the student before their interview? So the minimum deposit amount required for a CAS is typically what we ask for before we arrange a pre-CAS interview. If you have any questions regarding that or are looking for any extenuous circumstances, then please contact your account manager. Where can we find application process for University of South Wales? Please, once again, just contact your account manager regarding that. Can a student switch to another centre after completing their foundation? Again, please contact your account manager. Who decides the interval after 1 failure of pre-CAS interview? So we leave that to your discretion as the agent. So when we provide our feedback on a student who has failed a pre-CAS interview, basically our expectation of you on that point is to take that feedback, discuss with the student, work on that feedback with the student, and then we want you to then request the next interview once you feel the student is ready for that next attempt. So obviously it's something that is up to you to decide. Obviously, we have to take into consideration the deadlines as well. So maybe there may be a question on that. Okay, next questions. Is it possible to switch campuses within the running courses? So I'm guessing that's in relation more to our branch campuses with Ulster University and Northumbria University. It would depend on the circumstances and it would depend on the reason why. Typically, our university partners don't like to do this because obviously they have to report the change of circumstances to UKVI. And when they explain it to UKVI, they have to give the reason for it. So students can, if once they've enrolled and once they've arrived in the UK, if they want to change campus, they can ask within their course. However, we can't guarantee that any request would ever be accepted because it would depend on the circumstances. And okay, do you accept students from Punjab, Haryana, and Gujarat? So we are not currently accepting students from Punjab or Haryana, but we do accept students from Gujarat. And are any regions in Vietnam banned to send applications? No, we currently don't have any regions in Vietnam where we are not accepting students. Okay, so okay, and again, just another English language test question come in. Please contact your account manager regarding that. Okay, so moving on. So we are now going to be looking at the pre-CAS interview case studies. So what I'm going to be showing is some of our examples of where students have failed pre-CAS interviews. We're going to be breaking down those answers and what the areas of concerns are and how those students may have potentially been able to improve. Okay, so the first example, we asked the student, why did you choose the UK for your studies? And they said that the UK is a great place to live and study. I've always loved the culture of the UK and is known worldwide. The quality of life is really good. The climate is similar to my home country, unlike America and Canada, which are very cold countries. Also, the living costs are more affordable and the UK is much closer to my home country. And then the student was asked, why did you decide not to study in your home country? And they said that in my home country, the studies are only theory, there is no practical study. So what is wrong with this answer? So first of all, the answer is full of very vague points and it lacks any personal relevance. All of those points that the student has raised, not at any point have they made any indication of why these things are important to them. So why is it important to them that the UK is more affordable than America or Canada? Why is it more important to them that they like the culture of the country? None of these points also are actually related to the benefit of studying. They're all quite unrelated points. I guess the only point that the student has made that can be argued as relevant is the cost. Also, the climate of the UK is not similar to South Asian countries. They are typically much hotter and their rain seasons are typically much more extreme. So we typically do not like students trying to say that the UK has a similar climate because the honest truth is that when you really compare the details, it doesn't really. Also, America does have some parts that have extremely cold weather, but they also have some parts of the country that are extremely hot. So to say that America is a very cold country is factually incorrect because there are many, particularly in the southern states of America, they have much warmer climates than the UK. They've also said that in their home country, the studies are theoretical, and the UK, the studies are practical. Now, it's a very vague and general statement, and it doesn't show that the student has taken the option of studying in their home country seriously. So, yeah, they've talked about obviously a difference between the UK and their home country. However, they haven't said why it's important to them or explained this very vague statement. So, what exactly do they mean by the studies are theoretical and not practical? And how is it going to be beneficial to them in the future to have that practical experience? So, I mean, it's one of those answers where if you just say that one sentence on its own, it's a very vague and generic answer that we typically don't accept. However, if the student could expand on that point and maybe just explain that point in a little bit more detail, then that would improve the answer. Now, as for why they chose the UK, we'd want them to talk a little bit more about the academic benefits of studying in the UK, not just about, the standard of living. And also, obviously, we'd ask that they don't make any factually incorrect errors, such as saying that America is a very cold country. They've said that the living costs are more affordable. We would want them to give some examples and name the source of where they got that information from. So, the UK probably is more affordable than the USA or Canada. We are aware of that. However, we want the student to be able to show that they have done this research. So how much is the difference in cost between those two countries? Have they converted the currencies correctly and calculated the correct difference in their costs? And have they got their information from a reliable source? Or have they just decided against it because a friend told them it was a bad idea? Obviously, the amount of research that they do and where they get their information from is very important. And in this answer, the student hasn't really demonstrated that they've looked at any credible sources of information to gather some factual detail on this. Okay, so another example. So a student was asked, did you consider studying in any other countries? And the student said, I didn't apply, but I did research other countries like Canada, Australia, and the USA, but the weather in Canada is too harsh. In Australia, the fees are too expensive, and in America, they have some racism issues. So with this answer, there is very little detail, suggesting that no research has actually been done. They've said that Australia is too expensive, but they haven't given any examples. And with those examples, we would also expect them to name the source of that information. Also, they've said that the weather in Canada is too harsh, but they haven't actually described in any detail what kind of weather conditions they would be facing and what they really mean by it's too harsh. And, does that really outweigh the academic benefits that could be from studying in Canada? I mean, none of the points that the student has really raised here are related to academic or studying benefits. Also, America does have issues with racism. Obviously, we've seen that across news headlines for more than a year now. However, this isn't an issue that's exclusive to America, and the student has given no indication of how the issue of racism in the USA compares to that in the UK or in any other country. So obviously, as much as we want to talk about the positive aspects of the UK, we do know that, unfortunately, there are some, things about the UK that aren't as good. Obviously, maybe the racism problem isn't anywhere near as bad as it is in America, but there is still a racism issue within the UK at times. And it's important that students are aware of that and making a meaningful comparison if they're going to be using that point. For them just to say that there are some racism issues and then not elaborate any further on that point or give any comparison or demonstration of research, that's where the answer becomes unacceptable. Okay, so different example. And this time we were asking a student, where is the money coming from to pay for your tuition fees and your living expenses? And the student has said, my parents will be sponsoring my studies. My father has a family agricultural business and earns 60 lakh Pakistani rupees per year. And then when asked what kind of agricultural business does he have, he just says he has a farm growing crops like vegetables. So in terms of the errors with this answer, firstly, They've said that their parents are sponsoring, but they've made no mention of their mother's financial position, which could make a very big difference. Obviously, if the mother has her own source of income, then it means that she's not dependent on the father, which means more of that 60 lakh income could be used to fund the student studies. He's also described his father's job as essentially a farmer, but he's described it as an agricultural business, something that sometimes can be seen as trying to over-exaggerate the source of their father's income. Now, I'm not saying that that is what the student was trying to do with this answer. It's just sometimes it can give that false impression. Also, 60 lakh Pakistani rupees is quite far above the national average for a vegetable farmer in Pakistan, which is the source of income that's been described. So whilst it's not impossible that they could be making that much money from this, it seems unlikely. So that would force us to ask further questions around this. How is he able to make that much money from this source of income? And is the student able to provide any evidence of this? And then also, obviously, when we ask the student to provide a bit more detail, we ask what kind of agricultural business is this? All he said is it's growing vegetables. So it still looks like the student is trying to give as little detail as possible. Obviously, it gives the impression that maybe the student is being slightly evasive. They don't want to talk about it too much because maybe they're concerned that if they talk about it too much, then it seems more and more unlikely with each answer to be true. Okay, so next example. So a student was asked why they chose the Ulster University London campus. And the student said that Ulster is a young, dynamic and innovative university. It is ranked 601 to 800 in the Times Higher Education World Rankings and in the top 150 young universities worldwide. They provide a unique range of career-oriented modules to help prepare students for work. They also provide an internship for work-based learning, and the teachers are professional and highly experienced. According to the National Student Survey from 2014 to 2019, the student satisfaction rate was 100%. And in the 2018 DLHE survey, the employability rate is 92% for graduates getting a job within 6 months. Now, it's got a lot of detail in the answer, but all of these points of details are just copied directly from the Ulster University website. Now, it's fine for students to use the website as a source of information, but we still expect them to add some personal relevance to this answer, which is what they haven't done. Also, some of the statistics that they mentioned are out of date. So the DLHE survey is from 2018. The student satisfaction rate that they've talked about is from 2014 to 2019, so that's 2 years out of date. Also, they mentioned the university is in the top 150 young universities worldwide. Now, that is also out of date. It was in the top 150 in 2018. Now it sits in the top 200. So that's an out of date statistic, but it's also the student hasn't mentioned the date in that statistic, which gives the impression that they are implying that the statistic is current, which would then be considered a factual error. Also, they said that the employability rate was 92%, but that's not correct. The DLHE survey refers to graduates within a job or within further study, not just about working. So to say 92% of students are in a job after 6 months is a factual error and is not true. So that's another part where the student will be struggling. Also, their comments on internships, career-oriented modules, and professional teaching staff. The majority of UK universities claim to offer the exact same thing, so they're not really offering any differentiation between the universities. Maybe there are other universities that provide one or two of those things, but not the third. So maybe that's something that the student could point out in comparisons. Also, once again, the student hasn't made any reference to why any of this is important to them. I will actually say right now that actually this answer that I'm quoting right here, this is an example that is coming from one interview, but it's actually this exact same answer I've seen repeated in multiple interviews over the past few months. So that's an indication also that the answer may be scripted, because again, the student hasn't put any personalization into their answer. Okay, so next example, student was asked, what do you plan to do once you have completed your course? And the student said, I will return to my home country and start my career as a manager in a multinational company. Now, also later on in that same interview, so this wasn't the following question, but it was asked at the end of the interview, the student was asked, do you plan to apply for a 2-year post-study work permit at the end of your course? And the student has said, yes, it's a great opportunity. So looking at the first answer, now a multinational company could mean anything, from the manufacturer of cars to financial services to higher education. It could be anything. And they're very different interests and very different career paths. Also, just saying the word manager is also extremely vague, as many companies, especially multinational companies, would have dozens of different management level roles. Just as an example, QA Higher Education, we have over 20 different manager roles that are all very different jobs requiring very different experience and skill sets. So if we were to take someone in a management role within QA Higher Education, they would not necessarily be the right person to be a manager or be able to conduct the role of any other management role. So for a student just to say, I'm going to be able to be a manager is very vague, and it's not showing any personal relevance or any personal interest in their future career. Also, they've said that after completing their course, they plan to return to their home country. But later on in the interview, they contradicted that answer by saying they plan to apply for post-study work, meaning at least one of those answers is not genuine. Because do they plan to stay in the UK for 2 more years, or do they plan to go home as soon as they have completed their course? Because the student hasn't given a clear answer on that, it means that one of those answers is potentially not genuine. Okay, another example. So this time it was a student who was asked why they chose the Northumbria University London campus. And they said it's one of the best universities in the UK with an international reputation. The campus has many great facilities like professional teachers, IT labs, sports facilities, a 24/7 library, and a cafeteria. Also, the student union that helps organise societies and events. Now, unfortunately, this answer is full of errors. So, first of all, the student has said that it's one of the best universities in the UK, which is a very bold claim, and they've given nothing to support it. Now, there may be some areas in which Northumbria is one of the best universities in the UK. For example, Northumbria performs very well on its student satisfaction rate, and it performs very well on its graduate startup rate, for example. Or it could be one of the best in the UK for the internship placements and the percentage of students on work placement courses who get their internship. You know, those are all valid points. They're all important points, and they are points of comparison where you could claim, perhaps, that Northumbria is one of the best in the UK. But if you don't give any evidence to support the claim, then we don't know what makes it one of the best. Is it one of the best overall or in a specific area? If you just say it's one of the best overall, then that is something that UKVI would be likely to dispute. They'd say, well, actually, Northumbria is ranked, according to Times Higher Education, it's ranked around 50th in the UK, which puts it just inside the top half. So does that really make it one of the best if it's just about in the top half? But if it is one of the best in a specific area, then the student needs to say what that area is. Also, to say that it has an international reputation is also quite vague. All the facilities mentioned as well, they are standard amongst most universities, and some of them are not available at the Northumbria University London campus. We don't have sports facilities or a cafeteria on the campus, and the library is a digital library, not an on-campus library. So the student has put in some factual errors there, and these are things that UKVI do know about. They know about the campus. They know what the London campus has and doesn't have. Obviously, student unions, they are present in almost every UK universities. Every UK university will also claim to have professional teachers, and the majority of them will also have IT labs. So the student hasn't really highlighted here either what's important to them or what makes Northumbria stand out from the competition. So that's where the student would need to improve that answer in saying, where does Northumbria stand out? What advantages does Northumbria give over other universities? And why is that important to them? Okay, so another example, this time it's asking about course content. So we've asked the student to name the modules of the course that they're going to be studying, and they've done so correctly. And then we've asked about one specific module. We've asked them, what is the digital landscape module going to be about? And the student has said, this module provides an understanding of e-business and its practical application in a range of different contexts. Upon completion of this module, I will have an in-depth knowledge of e-business, critically evaluate current practice on creating and managing e-business, understand implications of e-business for international business, and analyze how organizations apply e-business technology to support competitive strategy in an international context. Now, it sounds like a great answer. However, the problem is that this answer that they have given is an almost word-for-word copy of the description that is given on the website. Now, we are not looking for students to memorize what's written on the website. We're looking for students to demonstrate that they have read the content on the website and show that they understand it. The student hasn't given any indication that they know what e-business is. They haven't given any indication of how this module may be relevant to the future career plan that they want to pursue, or how it compares to their current level of knowledge or experience. What do they currently know about e-business? What is this module going to give them that takes them beyond their current level? Obviously, they haven't given any personal relevance to this answer. They've just copied the website. And that's something that we want to see our students not doing. Even recently, we have received a visa refusal where UKVI themselves put in the refusal letter that all you have done is repeated comments from the internet. You have not demonstrated any understanding of what you have read and what you have said. So it's very important that students are able to personalize their answer, to tie it in and to show what's important to them. Okay, so just before we go on to the visa refusal examples, I'm just going to check the chat for any questions that have come in. Okay, in case the pandemic situation remains the same, whether online classes will be conducted or otherwise. So our current expectation is that by the time we reach September, most of the UK's domestic coronavirus restrictions will have been lifted. Now, as a result, that means that UKVI will likely expect at least partial attendance for students on the university campus. The exact guidance hasn't yet been announced. That's just the preliminary advice that we've received through our university partners and through UKVI. Obviously, since the start of the pandemic, basically the UKVI introduced a new rule that allowed universities that sponsor international students to teach them entirely online. Now, basically that rule was put in place and it was specifically written that that rule would apply up until September 2021. And at this time, we are not expecting that rule to be renewed or extended any further. So we will expect some classroom learning to be conducted in September, and we will expect students to be in the UK by September. However, some classes may still be online. To prove finances for a bachelor's program, does student have to submit documents related to work of parents, house, and parents' monthly income, or just show a savings book? So I think one of the most beneficial things, particularly for students on bachelor's programs, would be when they provide their evidence of funding to UKVI, if they have some evidence within those documents that shows the parents' level of income or the financial sponsor's monthly income, if we can see the money coming in on a regular basis, then from a credibility perspective, that looks much better than just a blank bank statement that shows that the money has been in an account for 6 months with no transactions happening. Because obviously then you don't know where that money came from, how long it was there before the statement started. However, if the student, say, for example, is giving a statement that covers, say, for example, 2 months, and you can see on that statement over that 2-month period, you can see the inbound payments that reflect the parent's income, that is going to be much more credible than providing, say, for example, a fixed deposit account. Now, I know that the fixed deposit accounts are very popular with students because it's much easier to keep the funds in there. However, from a credibility perspective, obviously we can't see the day-to-day financial activity to see how much money they're actually able to put away into their savings per month. What is the maximum study gap for undergraduate and postgraduate studies for students from Pakistan? So we don't have a study gap limit as such. Every case is decided on a case-by-case basis. So obviously for any students, you would need to just submit the application and see if that application is successful or not. Typically, it will depend on the CV and the personal statement. Obviously, students with a longer study gap, we're going to expect to see every necessary detail in their CV covering their entire gap. And also would expect to see a very strong personal statement explaining why they have waited so long before returning to full-time studies. Can we get a recording of this session? So we will try and share that. I will share an email with you all either later on today or by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Do you consider the students' English when assessing the pre-CAS interview? So if students are, say, for example, for pathway with a 4.5 IELTS, they would be different to a student with 5.5. So yeah, that's correct. Obviously, if a student's on a pathway program, we anticipate that their level of English is likely to be a bit weaker. And we do take that into consideration when making our assessment of a student's credibility. However, we do still need to make sure that the student is competent in terms of when they start their studies and that they'll be able to keep up with the classes. And also we need to make sure that they are still going to be able to, at least on very basic questions, be able to answer or understand the question and answer clearly. Yes, it is pointed out the wrong answers, but what are the right answers examples? Okay, there is a reason why I haven't given examples of correct answers. And that's simply because I have done that with training before with agents, and they have then copied those answers and given them directly to the students and said, read this. So that's the reason why I don't share right examples. I just explain how the students can improve on these bad answers in order to make them a much stronger and better example. Obviously, we also do that on all of the feedback that we provide as well. However, if I was to tell you this is what a student is supposed to say, then that essentially counts as coaching. And that's the kind of thing that would basically get ourselves and the university in a lot of trouble with UKVI. So the simple answer is I'm not allowed to give you examples of what would be the right answers. Plus, also, it's not about right or wrong. It's about whether the student is convincing in their answers of whether they are a genuine student or not. So an answer that one student could make as convincing may not be as convincing from another student trying to say the exact same thing. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so student has already got the visa and Sri Lanka is in the red list. Can they study online until it becomes amber or green? So this isn't confirmed yet in the guidance, but we are expecting, red list or not, we are expecting the students should be in the UK by September, because we're expecting that's when the full online study for international students rule is going to be dropped. So even if they're on the red list, they will still have to travel to the UK. The upside to, if they've already got their visa and if they're already studying, if they started in the January or the May intake, they haven't had to be spending money on their UK living costs for the last few months. So hopefully where they have saved money there, hopefully that money is going to help them be able to afford their hotel quarantine. Also, I'm pretty sure that all of the UK government approved hotels, I can't confirm for every single one of them, but I believe most of them have good Wi-Fi facilities available so that those who are having to self-isolate in a hotel can still go about their day-to-day either business or studying activities. If a student has funds in their account for a year, how much duration statement should they provide? 6 months to a year or 28 days only? So it's up to you. Obviously, the more information I think on a bank statement can be better. Obviously, if that 6 months to a year shows a clear pattern of financial transactions that shows a stable source of income and it shows the regular monthly activity, that can help from a credibility perspective. However, from a meeting the requirements of UKVI perspective, it just needs to show 28 days or more. What if the student can't reach the UK even with late acceptance date due to long delay on visa applications and the outcome by September? That is something that we don't have very clear guidance on yet from UKVI. It's a very good question. I'll talk to my colleagues in both the Northumbria and Ulster compliance teams and see if they have see what their thoughts and guidance may be on this. Is there any student quarantine needed after reaching the UK and how much does it cost? So if the student is currently in a country that is on the UK's red list, then they have to self-isolate in a hotel that is selected by the UK government. And that does come at a cost of £1,750. They are also required to purchase a rapid testing kit for tests to take on their 2nd and 8th day after arriving in the UK. I believe the cost of those kits is currently around £220 approximately. Also, if during that hotel isolation period, if they test positive for coronavirus at any point, then they will need to stay in their hotel quarantine at an additional daily rate until they test negative. Full details of that are on the UK government website. I would advise that you always advise your students to check the latest guidance before traveling. If they are coming from a country that is on the amber list, then they will need to self-isolate or quarantine. However, they will be able to do this in their own private accommodation. Is there any plans underway from the side of the university to help students from the red listed zone? So this is something that has been discussed, but is unlikely to be approved given the scale of the number of students that we have applying from red listed countries. Also, obviously, the red list has been in place for 6 months now, and so far, for the students who have been studying with us online, we haven't provided financial support to them. So it would potentially be quite unfair if we then changed our position on that. So yeah, at the moment, we're not covering the cost of hotel quarantine at all. Although if you do have any further questions about that, then feel free to send those questions or suggestions over to your account manager. In case of online study option, can a student opt to skip to the next semester, i.e. January or May intake? The problem is they would have already, if they're enrolled online, they've probably already been given a CAS, which means they have to complete their course within the duration or within the validity period of their visa based on the CAS that has been issued. So depending on the course and depending on the intake, that option probably isn't going to be available. However, that's something, if you have a group of students facing that difficulty, then feel free to email us directly and we can always pass on that question to our academic leadership team. However, I think that kind of request is unlikely to be approved. Okay, so that seems to be all of the questions in the chat box for now. So let's move on to the visa refusal case studies. So what we're going to have here is we're going to have quotes taken from real refusal letters that we have received over the last 9 months. And we're going to be talking about why the student was refused and what could have been done to prevent that refusal. Okay, so the first example, a student was asked why they chose Ulster University, and they said because it provides specific info from micro to macro context of international business, and it prepares me as a leader and manager of the future, and it will also allow me to develop the key concept of the global business. This uni has a better ranking reviews according to the Guardian system, and most importantly is partnered with QA, which have 20 plus years developing IT business skills and are the UK's largest corporate training provider. Your response appears to be more appropriate to explain why you chose the course you have. Notwithstanding this, whilst I accept that the partnership with QA might be considered an advantage for a prospective student, you later stated that QA was a student hub, which provides services like printing, computer lockers, and a private place for study. When you were questioned about your initial statement on QA, you said they can organising the workshop for students and they inform day-to-day information on the blackboard to the student man. However, QA is an independent body and therefore it is not clear from your responses why this is so significant in choosing this university or course. So breaking down where the student has gone wrong here. So first of all, they were asked why they chose Ulster, and the majority of their answer, they were talking about the course, not the university. So it's not a direct answer. Also, they've given contradicting answers from this answer to another question on what is QA and what role do they play in the process. So that indicates potentially a lack of research done by the student. Also, some of the answers that they've given don't make complete sense. So they're a bit unusual, they're a bit unorthodox, and that's one of the reasons why basically the caseworker has struggled to understand what the student is trying to mean, and it looks like the student hasn't really done any proper research because they haven't indicated correctly or clearly what role QA plays or why it is important to them. So that's where the student could have improved, is personalizing their answer a little bit more, being direct and talking about the university when asked. Those are the areas where this student would have been expected to improve. Okay, so next example. So in this refusal letter, it says, you state that after your studies, you would be seeking employment at a managerial level with companies like Amazon, Wipro, Citigroup, and Infosys. You were asked to interview what job roles were available at Wipro. And when you looked and you said it was an IT company, but you did not say the kind of roles that were advertised. You then said you had searched for a manager's job. And when asked to specify, you said you were interested in a role as a coordinator. When the interviewing officer pointed out that a coordinator is not a managerial role, you said, in beginner, and then a long pause, in beginning, I am a fresher, manage a job like account manager, human resource manager. You are not able to say exactly the kind of roles that you would be interested in and how they are tied into your proposed course. This does not satisfy me that you have conducted any meaningful research into your future career prospects, and as such that you are genuinely intending to study. So, breaking down this answer, so where has the student gone wrong, potentially? So first of all, they've talked about they would be seeking employment at a managerial level, which, as we've already discussed earlier, is a very vague comment to make because managerial level position could be a variety of different job roles that require different experiences and skill sets. Now, also, they've talked about the companies, and they've mentioned Amazon, Wipro, Citigroup, and Infosys. Now, those are quite different companies in terms of what they do and the kind of products and services that they provide. Obviously, you've got Amazon, which is an e-commerce platform that also diversifies into areas such as publishing and digital media. You've then got Citigroup, which is financial services primarily. And you've also got Wipro and Infosys, which operate in the IT sector. So they haven't really specified a particular type of managerial role that they would be interested in, nor have they explained what kind of industry that they would want to be working in. Also, they've then contradicted themselves by first they said they wanted to be a manager, then they said they wanted to be a coordinator. This was pointed out to them, and then it looks like when they were pointed out that difference, it looks like the student then potentially panicked you can tell by they're saying in the beginner, and then they make a very long pause, and they're pausing with their answer, they're hesitating, they're not sure what to say, and then they just start talking about various different manager type job roles. So they say account manager or human resource manager, but those are two very different departments that even require two very different skill sets. Obviously, account managers are typically geared towards either the sales type role or the finance type role. So you would be looking at whether your skill set belongs in sales or in numbers, or in a human resource manager role, it's more of a working on more of a personal level, I guess. So very different skill sets, very different roles, and the student hasn't really specified what they want to do with their future, nor have they been able to tie in how it relates to their course. So that's why the entry clearance officer was not satisfied that the student had conducted meaningful research into their future career prospects. So where could the student have improved in their answers and potentially avoided this refusal and this comment? Well, first of all, I think is they should have specified what type of managerial role they would be interested in, depending on what they consider to be their strongest skill set, and also depending on what role would be most relevant to the majority of the content of their course. So, for example, if they were applying for a course that specialized in marketing, then they should be applying for a marketing manager role. If they are applying for an IT course, then they would be looking for a technical support manager type role. If their course has a specialization in finance, then obviously you'd be looking at a financial manager role or maybe a management accountant. So depending on the content of the course would be a good determination of what kind of managerial role they may be looking for. And then also on the different companies, I'd recommend that the student looks at a range of companies, but within a specific sector. So if they were interested in a company like Amazon, then maybe because Amazon is primarily an e-commerce platform, maybe they should have been looking at other web-based or e-commerce platform-based businesses, or maybe other tech companies, because obviously Amazon has a very large tech division as well. Obviously demonstrating some kind of consistency between the different companies that they're looking at. And then just staying consistent with their answer after that. So obviously where, they should have, when asked about being a manager, they should have continued on talking about managerial roles, not then changing that to a coordinator. So that's really where the student could have avoided this. And actually a lot of the comments that have come from the entry clearance officer stem from the fact that the answer started off badly by saying that by just talking about managerial level and talking about very generic choice of companies. Okay, so moving on to the next example. And in this example, it says, so when the interviewing officer asked you what institution you will be studying at, you replied and basically just said, and just didn't know what to say. When the question was rephrased, the student then answered that they chose Ulster University in London campus. When asked why they had chosen Ulster University, you replied by stating, because it comes on one of the well-reputed institutes in the UK, and this university is 601 in World University Ranking by Times Higher Education, and international students from over 100 countries worldwide choose every year because unique experience of study, and I search on Google and I found this university provide full range of support service for the student. When asked about other institutes that you have considered besides Ulster, you responded with, I considered UCA. When asked what advantage Ulster University had over the other institute you considered, you replied, because it's located in central London and UCA located in outer London, and feels less, and I choose Ulster in COVID situation, I can easily transfer to accommodation to university. This is not a credible answer, and you have not provided any evidence to justify how you drew the conclusions that Ulster University was the most suitable institution for your educational needs. It is reasonable to expect a genuine student to be able to give a proficient explanation about the advantages of their chosen university, again, due to the extensive research that they have conducted around their chosen university and the other universities considered. The fact that you could not provide a detailed explanation of the advantages of Ulster leads me to doubt once again the credibility of your research around your chosen university and other universities you considered, which also leads me to doubt your credibility as a genuine student. So, breaking this down, I think first of all, from the very start, it indicates that the student was quite weak and maybe lacking in practice, because at first, when they were asked what institution they will be studying at, the student didn't understand the question. It was only when the question was rephrased, probably to include the word university, that the student then said that they have chosen Ulster. Now, when they were asked why they chose Ulster in particular, they talked about well reputed inside the UK, ranked 601, and international students from over 100 universities choose it. And when they searched on Google, they found that the university provides a full range of support services for the student. Now, nothing about that answer was particularly unique. There are a lot of other universities that have a wide range of diversity, which is international students from, several other countries, possibly even 100. To say that it's just well reputed, that doesn't really provide much detail. It's a very vague point. The ranking is, probably something that wouldn't be considered anything special, although it depends on what other universities they've also considered, I guess. And then they've said that they searched on Google, so they haven't really talked in much detail about how much research they've done, other than typing Ulster University into Google. And they've said that it provides a full range of support services for their students. Now, a lot of universities provide a lot of support services for their students. Are there any particular support services that Ulster offers that the others do not? That's something that the student hasn't really explained. What kind of support services are available? Are there any particular support services that are exclusive to Ulster? The student hasn't demonstrated any meaningful research into Ulster University itself. The only actual factual points that they have made are about the World University ranking. Also, when asked about other universities, they've only mentioned one other university, which is the University of Creative Arts. And they've said in their answer UCA rather than University of Creative Arts. I think this is something very important to pick up on with all students with pre-CAS interviews as well. When they're talking about other universities that they've considered, I know there are a lot of other universities that are referred to as their acronyms. So, for example, or by their initials. So, for example, UCA for the University of Creative Arts, or UEL for the University of East London, BCU, Birmingham City University, DMU for De Montfort University. Obviously, whenever a student is saying that, they should say the full university name, not just the initials. So rather than saying, I looked at DMU, say, I looked at De Montfort University. Now, what other advantages they were asked? So the student said that because Ulster is located in central London and the University of Creative Arts is located outside of London, and it feels less, and I choose Ulster in COVID situation, I can easily transfer to accommodation to university. Now, that answer doesn't really make sense. So, first of all, okay, yes, they are both located in London, although Ulster is located in the city. However, in the COVID situation, how does being in the city of London make it any easier or any safer for a student to travel into the city of London compared to traveling to a campus on the outskirts of London? That's not a very clear point. Also, the student has just said that it feels less. What do they mean by that? It's a very vague term that doesn't make any sense. Also, another point that could be raised, although the entry clearance officer didn't say in the refusal letter, the student has said that in the COVID situation, they can easily transfer to accommodation to university. Now, this could potentially give the impression that to this student, their choice of accommodation is more important than their choice of university. because they've chosen their university based on how easy it is to travel to from where they're going to live. Now, if that is the case, then why is that? So is there a reason why the student wants to live in a specific place? Is it because there's someone else that they already know who lives there? If that is the case, then we'd expect them to say so at some point further on in the interview. But also, if they wanted to study at a university where, due to the COVID situation, it was easier to reach the university, then the most logical choice for a student to make would be a university that has accommodation on the campus, so that they don't have to use any public transport to travel from their accommodation to their classes. That would be the most, if you were concerned about the risks of COVID, then that would potentially be one of the safer options. Now, there are arguments that could be made against that point. However, the student hasn't done so. So what could this student have done in order to prevent this refusal from happening? I think the most important thing above anything else would have been practice. Because first of all, the student didn't understand all of the questions that were being asked of them. So, and that's something that they would have been more likely to understand if they had had more practice. Secondly, obviously, with more practice, we would have been able to break down these answers could have been broken down much better. And you could have looked at, okay, where can this answer be improved? Where can that comment be improved? They've talked about the ranking of the university. Is that important? How is it important? Why is it important? How does it compare to the other universities considered? But the student hasn't covered any of that. And then also, they've only researched one other university, which doesn't look like they've looked at all available options, given the number of different universities that are in the UK. And given that they've only really mentioned about the university ranking being why they chose Ulster, as well as the location. So there are other universities in London that have a similar ranking to Ulster, and that they would have been able to travel to from their accommodation. Why have they not researched those other places? Is it because they just got lazy with their research, perhaps? So doing more research and taking more practice attempts at the interview, I think, would have been the most beneficial to helping this student avoid this visa refusal. Okay, so another example. So this time, the student's refusal letter says, your previous course of study was a Bachelor of Science in English Literature. When asked how this relates to your new course of MSc International Business, you said, I completed my bachelor's in 2018 and started a job as a trainee officer in an administrative department and multi-purpose company. Now I am looking to do my further study in the UK, so it is relevant to my work experience. This response does not demonstrate a correlation between the two subjects. Further to this, given that you state you immediately commenced employment in an administrative department, leads me to doubt your credibility as a genuine student, as you did not utilize your previous qualifications, leads me to doubt whether the same would be the case with your new course. When asked about future plans post-study and what research you have conducted into them, you said, I have always wanted to be a head of business development in an international or national business, like Unilever Bangladesh, Nestle Bangladesh, Gramophone. I did research and I compared and I looked at the job fair in Bangladesh. The previous course you completed was a Bachelor of Science in English Literature, which indicates you have not always sought a career in business, as you state these two subjects are unrelated. So breaking down why this student has been refused. So they are applying for a business course, having previously studied a course not related to business. Now, when asked how this course relates to international business, they've just started talking about their work experience and that they started pursuing work in an administrative field as soon as they graduated. So there's no indication in the student's answer that they ever even tried to pursue a career related to the degree that they studied. Now, if they've done that once, there's a possibility that they would do the same again. That is basically what the entry clearance officer has said in the letter and given them reason to doubt their credibility as a student. So what could this student have done to improve on these answers to potentially try and avoid this visa refusal from happening? Well, so first of all, when asked about how this course relates to their new course, they should have addressed the issue head on that it's not related, because obviously that then shows honesty. And they should also explain why they did not pursue a career related to that previous bachelor's degree. If they were to explain that and then say, if for whatever reason they were not able to pursue a career related to their English literature degree, as a result, they then moved into an administrative department, and that's where they started their career. And now they want to continue progressing that career further, but they want to have some more academic qualifications behind them to pursue that career. That would have been a much better answer than what's been said here, because what's been said here is that the student just started talking about their work experience. So they haven't really answered the question directly. And I think if they'd answered the question directly and honestly, then that would have served much more benefit. Now, also, when they were asked about their future plans post-study, they contradicted themselves, because they said that they always wanted to be a head of business development in an international business. However, if they always wanted to be a head of business development, always being the key word there, then they never would have previously studied a bachelor's degree in English literature. That's basically the headline. So where the student made an error in their future career plans is where they said they always wanted to be a head of business development. If they had said, since starting their career and since learning more about the structure of an organization and the career potential that's available to her, and realize that's the job title, that's the job role that she wants to pursue, or they want to pursue, then that would have been a much better answer as well, because it wouldn't have contradicted the fact that they previously studied a completely unrelated bachelor's degree. So I think this is an example of where a student has tried too hard to give a right answer instead of giving the honest answer. And actually, it was the honest answer that would have been more favorable for them in terms of credibility. Because if they had just said head on straight away, yes, I did a bachelor's in English literature, but for whatever reason, I did not get a career in that area. And that's why I started working in business. That's why I want to pursue my career in this area. And that's why I want this qualification. That would have been a much more credible answer, even though it does take the ties between the two courses away. But it's an honest answer. So that would have worked much better. Also, when they talked about their research into their future career plans, they said that they did research and they compared and they looked at a job fair in Bangladesh. Now, that's something that can't be verified. So, I mean, it's always beneficial for a student's credibility to be able to say that they got their information from somewhere that UKVI is then able to fact check. So if they said, I found this information on the company, if they can find that information on the company's website, then they should say to UKVI, okay, that's where I found it, and that's where you can find it if you go looking for it. Whereas if they just say that it was at a job fair, we don't know what this job fair was, when it was, who was there, how many people the student spoke to, what kind of role the person they spoke to was in. There's a very little detail on the research, and it's not something that can be easily verified in terms of making sure that the student is being honest and telling the truth. Okay, so another example. So you were asked, why choose a course in international business? And what does MSc, INTL, BUS with Advanced Practice, QHE, LN, FT stand for? And you stated, I already mentioned I am working in a company which does international trade, but they don't have enough knowledge to do international trade. I feel that I am behind as most people my age to achieve many things, so I will like to do the same. And I don't know what this means. It's not clear as to why the company. You gave a generic answer, and it's not clear what your job role is within the company, and no details were given on what type of business you want to start. So it's quite a short and brief point. Just looking at the questions, first of all. So they were asked why they chose to study international business. And they were also asked, what does that course title stand for? Now, this is something that anyone who has seen a CAS statement issued by Ulster University will know, that this is how the course titles are published on a CAS statement. Now, this is because Ulster, in quite a different way to our other university partners, they have on the UKVI system, they register the courses with different with different course titles, depending on the campus and the mode of study. So, and because of a character limit on how much can be typed into that box, that's why the course title is abbreviated to MSc, INTL, BUS, WADPR, QAHE, LN, FT. Now, what that stands for is MSc, International Business with Advanced Practice, QA Higher Education, London, full-time. Now, if any students ever question anything that is written in their CAS, then it's important that they double check with us to make sure that they understand it. Because I think that's one of the parts where the student has gone wrong here and where they've got in trouble with UKVI, is that the student didn't know what the content of their CAS letter meant, and they didn't understand it. Now, I know that a lot of students and a lot of agents as well have, when they've seen these CASs, they've come to me and said, why is the course title written like that? It's supposed to say whatever the full name of the course is. Unfortunately, the full name, including the QAHE, the London, and the full-time, it goes over the character limit, which is why we have it in this abbreviated format. If any of your students ever have any question about that, then feel free to let us know or to double check. But what you will see is sometimes you'll see MSc International Business with Advanced Practice, and you'll see, for example, instead of where it says LN, it might say BHM. And that will obviously mean one of those course titles means London campus and the other one means Birmingham campus. And likewise, FT means full-time, obviously because the university does have a part-time version of this course, although it's not available to international students. Now, the other part where the student has gone a bit wrong is where they were asked about why they chose to study international business. And they mentioned that they're working in a company that does international trade, but they don't have enough knowledge to do international trade. So that's a bit of a contradiction to say that they're doing international trade, but they don't know how to do it. Now, it's not a complete contradiction in the sense that both of those statements can't be true. However, it sounds a bit irregular, let's say. Now, he said that he feels behind as most people his age achieve many things and that he wants to do the same. So that sounds very generic because he's talking about what other people are doing, not what he wants to do or what they want to do. I'm not sure if the student was male or female. However, so where could this student have improved that answer? So it's fine for them to say that they work in a company doing international trade. That's a good starting point for this answer. However, what they should have done is they should have highlighted where they are lacking in knowledge, in what parts of their job role, in what kinds of responsibility, where are they struggling? Are they struggling with certain aspects of administration? Are they struggling with marketing? Are they struggling with accounting, organization, finance? Where is the skills shortage? What skill are they currently lacking in? That's where the student should have included that to try and enhance this answer. And also, he said that he feels like he's behind most people their age and they achieve many things and they want to do the same. That actually takes personalization away from the answer. Rather than talking about saying that they have done many things, what the student should be saying is, I want to do this, and then highlight what that career plan is. Whereas instead, they've just said, I want to do what someone else is doing. So that's where they're lacking a bit in detail, and that's where we'd want to see them improve because it makes the answer more personal. Tie the course into where they're struggling in their current job, and also tie it into what they want to do with their own personal career in the future. Okay, next example. So the refusal letter says you have applied to study an MSc International Project Management with Advanced Practice. During your interview, you were asked about the modules that you will be studying, and you stated that project management is the process of leading work for a team. You were then asked to elaborate, to which you responded, it's a business resource. I would expect a genuine student looking to study a master's degree to be able to expand on what project management is. You were then asked about where you will live in the UK during your studies, to which you responded, after completing my course, I am coming back to India and starting my job with a multinational company. You state that once you complete your studies, you intend to return to your home country to open your own business. After asking that how you could work in a multinational company and open your business at the same time, you declare that you will manage. I do not dispute this statement. However, I am not satisfied that this plan at this point in time can be considered credible, especially considering that you have not been able to give any specifics about your future course, which is in the immediate future. I accept that you might have a genuine wish to open your own business one day. However, I'm not satisfied that at this point in time, this can be considered a credible motive for wishing to study in the UK. So where this student has gone wrong, first of all, as you can see in the first paragraph, the student has not answered the question that was being asked. So they were asked, what modules will you be studying? And they said that project management is the process of leading work for a team. So they've given the definition of the course title instead of naming any of their modules. They were then asked to elaborate further, to which the student responded, it's a business resource, which doesn't elaborate on what's already been said. If anything, that is even more vague than the comment previously given. So twice the student has been answered a question that they did not answer. So is that a case of the student didn't understand the question, or is it that the student didn't know how to answer the question and therefore said something completely different in the hope that it would change the topic of conversation? Either way, this is something that ultimately looks like the student was trying to avoid answering the questions, which goes back to a comment I made previously earlier on today about, we want to see students not giving evasive answers or trying to change the subject. Okay, so then they were asked about where they will live in the UK during their studies. And the student said, after completing my course, I'm coming back to India to start my job with a multinational company. So again, they've given a completely unrelated answer to the question that they were being asked. Going back to India to start a job with a multinational company has nothing to do with their plans for where they're going to live in the UK. Now, that can mean one of either two things. Either the student didn't understand the question, or the student has no accommodation plans for the UK and they didn't want to admit to it. So this was either evasive or they didn't understand the question. And then the final paragraph is about their future career plans. So at one point in the interview, they've said they want to work for a multinational company. At another point in the interview, they said they want to open a business. And when asked how they're going to be able to pull off what is something that is very challenging, they've just said, I'll manage. Now, obviously, if you're going to be taking on such a big challenge, and if you've got that kind of ambition, then we'd expect a student to be able to provide more detail on that. Does that mean that you want to work for a multinational company part-time? Or does that mean that you're going to use the money from your income with the multinational company to invest in your business and take on more people who can help that business? Those are things that could have made the overall plan credible. Whereas instead, the student has just said they'll manage, suggesting that they don't actually know what they're going to do in the future. This is particularly common as well, even though it's not related to this refusal. But quite often when we have been conducting our own interviews of students, and when they've said that they want to open a business in the future, quite often students have no idea what kind of business they want to run. There's no plan, there's no vision, which means there's no ambition and there's no motivation. How do they know that they have picked the right course if they don't know what they're going to do with this qualification? And that is why ultimately this entry clearance officer has determined that the student doesn't have a credible motive for wanting to study in the UK. So what could the student have done differently here to avoid this refusal? Well, first of all, they should have answered the questions that were being asked. and answered directly. Obviously, if they didn't know the answers to those questions, then that's a problem that should have been solved through practice and through the student understanding better the kind of questions that they're going to be expecting, and being able to understand what kind of answer they need to make. It's very important, I think, when preparing students for interviews. It's not about saying to them, okay, when you hear this question, say this. That's the wrong way to approach these interviews. I've actually previously worked as an agent before, and when I did that, I was primarily working with students, preparing them for these kind of interviews. And when I used to do that, I found the most effective technique was always to basically just talk to the student about the question itself to make sure that they understood it. And then I was always asking them to create their own answer. And that's why, as well, I said earlier on at the beginning of the presentation about how personalization is something that's very important. If we encourage the students to create their own answers once they understand the question, then that's going to be much more beneficial than saying, when you hear these words, say this. So more practice and a better understanding of the questions, that would have gone a long way for this student. And then also where else they could have avoided this refusal is in taking more time to consider their future career plans and having a better or a clearer image of what they want to do in the future. Okay, so those are the visa refusal case studies. So I'm just going to quickly go back to the chat box and see if any questions have been asked. Would you please leave your email over here? So my email is on the last slide, but actually let me just type that into the chat box now. Okay, if any student can't reach the UK due to delay of visa processing, what should we do? Please tell us the final date to join the university. So from September, if a student's visa application is delayed, if their visa application goes beyond the final enrollment deadline for the course, then basically what will happen is UKVI will contact the university. They will say that you have sponsored this student, they've missed the deadline, are you still willing to accept them? At that point, the university will more than likely then reply to UKVI and say, we will accept them, however, it's too late to accept them in this intake, so we will accept them in January, and then the student will basically have their intake deferred. That would be the standard practice. That was the way we used to do things before the pandemic and before we had online enrollment. So I suspect that we will be returning to that model for the September 2021 intake. Okay, do you think that a student should answer they chose Ulster because tuition fee is the most affordable in comparison with other universities? So it's a valid point. Obviously, if the student feels that Ulster can deliver on the same quality or a better level of quality compared to other competitors, but at a more reasonable tuition fee, then yes, that's a valid reason for choosing the university. However, what wouldn't be a valid answer would be if the student was talking about Ulster is much cheaper than all of these other universities, and then comparing them to universities that are either much higher ranked or not comparable in terms of what the students' other priorities are. So I think we need more detail than just I chose Ulster because it's the cheapest. We'd actually want them to show some comparisons, show what other factors may be important to them, and how Ulster scores in that regard as well. Right, okay. All the visa refusal cases do not seem to be justified because the students from the countries mentioned for the pre-CAS interview do not have much exposure as the UK students have. So there may be a less tough criteria. I mean, ultimately, whilst yes, maybe, students applying from overseas don't have access to the same amount of resources that an international student may have. At the same time, obviously, there's so many resources available online, between student review portals, between online study discussion groups, between the university's own websites, and educational agents such as yourselves. Many universities, they host international events where students can attend fairs and they can meet representatives. So I'm not sure I would fully agree with your point that they don't have as much exposure or as many resources for research as UK students have, which is why we do still hold them to a similar criteria. I hope that answers your question. How likely is it for students to be interviewed by the visa officer? Unfortunately, we can't, it's difficult to put a percentage on that, because UKVI will from time to time change their focus. So, for example, we know that in 2020 in India, UKVI interviewed approximately 1 in 14 student visa applicants from India. So, I mean, that could potentially give you a potential indicator in India. So the statistics are looking like 1 in 14. However, we then found out that a high proportion of those students were business students. So obviously a business student is more likely to be interviewed than say, for example, an IT student or an art student, for example. Will switching subject guarantee students face an interview? It doesn't, nothing's ever guaranteed. I think it increases the likelihood, but it doesn't guarantee that they'll be interviewed by UKVI. Regarding modules, do students need to remember all of the modules that they will be studying during the 3 years undergraduate and explain what each module is about? No, essentially, if the student can demonstrate knowledge of what they're studying within their first year, and then a more general overview of what other types of topic they will be covering later on in the course, I think that would be a bit different to, we wouldn't expect them just to list off every single module that's being covered over a 3-year period. So I think it would be important to focus on what they're going to be studying in the first year and how the second and third years advance on those first year modules. For job and company related question, even after giving local job portal address, UKVI says they couldn't verify it. So what would be best for pointing out the information to get student from? To be honest, if they were refused on that, I think that's the kind of case that we'd be looking at potentially an administrative review, because that does look like quite an unfair reason to refuse a student, to say that if we can name a website where the student has done their research and where they have found information, if it's an open web-based resource, then UKVI should be able to access it. So to make the claim that they couldn't verify it would be, I think, unreasonable. That's the kind of, if we saw that in a visa refusal letter, that's the kind of case where we're likely to recommend the student takes an administrative review. What suggestions will you give to students differentiating between universities of UK in their pre-CAS? So we're not going to ever suggest how a student answers their question, because obviously we have a responsibility to make sure that we are not coaching the students in how to answer our questions. We will simply provide feedback of where the students are weak. So in terms of the research that they do into other universities, I think that's something that if a student fails an interview based on that, then pay close attention to the feedback that we're providing. If you still have any further questions that are not addressed by the feedback that you receive, then please email your account manager, and then they will pass it on to us, and we will be able to talk with your account manager about potentially elaborating further on the feedback that we've provided. Okay, so moving on to the next section. So just a quick talk about administrative reviews. So first of all, what's the purpose of an administrative review? So it's the appeal process that's intended to correct any unjust visa refusal that is caused by either a caseworker error or instances where the immigration rules have not been applied correctly during the decision-making process. So if we believe that the visa application should not have been refused for the reasons given in the refusal letter, then those are the circumstances under which we would be going for an administrative review. Now, is this worth doing? Well, in most cases, yes, it is, because it's cheaper than submitting another visa application with a UKAS. And in terms of the amount of time that it would take to be decided, there's very little time frame difference between that and a new visa application. Also, a successful administrative review, meaning the refusal is overturned, would mean that the student would have that visa refusal taken off of their permanent immigration record, which is then going to further benefit them on any future visa applications. Obviously, we're seeing across the industry now, more and more universities are becoming more and more concerned about students with previous refusals on their immigration file, especially if they're refusals based on credibility where the student hasn't challenged those refusals. Because obviously sometimes a refusal due to credibility and not challenging it can often look like almost an admission that they agree with the points made by the entry clearance officer. For cases of credibility refusals, typically what we would do from QA side is we would want our university partner to request a copy of the interview transcript to then review that further, to then see if the comments in the visa refusal letter accurately reflect the words given by the student in their interview. And will QA provide any help in making an administrative review? Well, so under current regulations, members of the QA team cannot provide immigration advice directly to our students. However, what we can do is we have retained the services of a UK law firm, and they can prepare administrative review submissions on behalf of our students. Now, in cases where that service is used, QA will cover the cost of that service. However, we are only going to offer that service in cases where the QA team determines that there would be a good chance of the administrative review being successful. So if we see, for example, a credibility refusal where the student was unable to communicate clearly with the entry clearance officer or was giving answers that didn't make sense, then those are the kind of cases where we're not going to be suggesting an administrative review, or where the student is welcome to challenge it if they wish to do so, but we will not be using our solicitors for that. We will be using our solicitors in cases where we feel like the immigration rules haven't been applied correctly, or we feel like the caseworker in question has made an unfair, biased, or irrational decision. So that's something that is always decided on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we'd prefer that we never get any visa refusals, but if we do get some for credibility, then we do have that option available if we feel that the refusal is unjust or unfair. Oh, sorry, let me just go back there. Okay, another question that just came in through the chat. So, should married student apply single first and then apply for their spouse? So, that is what we do recommend. However, what we saw last year is that students have to be very careful with what they do here. So, if a married student plans on bringing their dependents with them to the UK, even if they apply separately, they still need to make sure that they are telling UKVI at the time of submitting their visa application. So, for example, if the student says to us that they are going to apply individually, but they plan to later bring their partner, then that is fine. We will accept that. We will still authorize the CAS. However, if the student goes to UKVI, submits their visa application, says that they are not bringing any dependents, and then as soon as they get their visa granted, their dependent then applies, then they can potentially have their visa revoked. So if a student says they're not bringing any family, and then their family start applying as dependents immediately after the visa is granted, then UKVI will see that as false information given on the initial visa application. And because of that, they will revoke the visa. We've seen them do it. So it's very important that students don't do that. So they can apply single or they can apply joint. But either way, if they are planning on bringing any dependents with them to the UK, they should always declare it at the visa application, even if it's not a joint application. So I hope that answers your point. Okay, so moving on to the next part, which is going to be the CAS request processes. So first of all, we have the Northumbria University London and Pathway Campus CAS request procedure. So first of all, the student will obtain their unconditional offer letter. Then we ask them to pay their minimum deposit. Once they've paid their minimum deposit, they will be asked to take their pre-CAS interview. Once they have passed their pre-CAS interview, they need to complete their offer acceptance and immigration history on the Northumbria University applicant portal. Now, this offer acceptance and immigration history on the portal, when the student receives their unconditional offer letter from Northumbria, they will also receive an email confirming their portal login details. So it's very important when the student gets their unconditional offer letter from Northumbria that they look out for a second email from Northumbria, because that's what they need to accept their offer. Once they've done that, then they need to submit their bank statements and TB tests via email to the QA recruitment team. That's assuming they are students applying from outside of the UK. Once those documents come through to us, our team then checks those documents and then confirms them to Northumbria for CAS processing. Now, when I say that the QA team checks that, so in this circumstance, that would be currently myself and my colleagues Eleni and Christina, who are both based here in London also. So it's the UK-based team who conducts all of the document checks. And then once those checks are done and we send that confirmation over to Northumbria, they will then issue the CAS via the applicant portal where the student has accepted their offer, and they will send a confirmation message via email as well. Okay, now for Ulster University, for Solent University Pathway, for the University of South Wales Pathway, and also, although it's still to be confirmed, the University of Roehampton potentially also, we will be using CAS Shield. Now, the CAS Shield process, it starts off similar. So the students get their unconditional offer, then they pay their minimum deposit, and then they get their pre-CAS interview. After those stages is when the process then changes. So after that, instead of the university portal, the student has to complete their offer acceptance via the QA Quercus portal. Once they've completed that offer acceptance and they've passed their interview and they've paid their deposit, once all those things are done, the student is then added to CAS Shield and an activation link is sent to the student via email the same day that those 3 steps are all marked as completed. So once they receive that link, then they confirm their personal details and upload all of their documents into CAS Shield. Now, the CAS Shield portal is something that agents can use as well. So you can upload the documents and fill in the personal details on behalf of the student. However, one thing that I must stress is that if you as an agent are entering details on behalf of a student, check every single question with the student before you answer. Please do not make any assumptions on the student's behalf, because otherwise you could potentially be putting the wrong information on the student's application. So it's very important that that's not done, particularly when it comes to questions like immigration history or applying with dependents, because we have seen instances where the agent has rushed through the CAS Shield process, put the wrong information or put the wrong answers into those questions, and then a visa refusal has then later occurred as a result. I'm not going to say any further detail beyond that, but just make sure if you are doing something on behalf of the students on CAS Shield, double check everything with the student before you confirm anything. Now, once all of those are uploaded to CAS Shield, the documents are then assessed by the QA admissions department. So that's not myself and my colleagues, Eleni or Christina. That's a separate department within QA. And they will conduct the document assessments and checks, and then they will send those documents over to the university to process the CAS. So that's the process for CAS Shield. And like I said, that's going to be for all of our university partners, except for Northumbria University. And it's not yet confirmed if we're going to be using this for the University of Roehampton. That will be confirmed hopefully before the end of this month. Okay, so the document checks that we do. So before a CAS is issued, for any student applying from outside of the UK, we must always check the evidence of funding and their TB test. So the evidences of funding that we accept will be typically a bank statement or a bank letter or a student loan. The TB tests are required if the student has lived in a country where a TB test is required for the past 6 months or more. A full list of countries can be found at this link in the slide, and obviously I will be sharing these slides with you later on. Now, also, this is quite rare for the South Asia and Southeast Asia regions. However, sometimes a student who has previously been in the UK on any type of visa, if their visa has required police registration, then they will have a police registration certificate. And we will always need to be provided a copy of that certificate before a CAS can be processed. That's a legal requirement that we have to keep a copy of that, because it's a criminal offence for students not to have an up-to-date police registration certificate when it's required as a term of their visa. Okay, so the evidences of funding. So first of all, just going through the types of documents that we accept. So for a bank statement to be accepted, it has to meet all of the following requirements. So it must show the full account holder's name and the full account number, no redactions on the account number, and no abbreviations on the student's name. It must show both the bank name and the logo of the bank. It has to show both. It can't be one or the other. It has to be both. It must cover a period of at least 28 consecutive days. It can cover longer periods, but 28 is the absolute minimum. And the closing date of the bank statement must be within 30 days of the student making a visa application. So when you're submitting a bank statement to us for a CAS, we ask them to be less than 2 weeks old. That's simply so it allows enough time for us to process the CAS, then for the student to get their CAS, check their CAS, make sure there's no errors or anything within it, and then process or submit their visa application. Obviously, if the bank statement is, say, 27 or 28 days old, then that doesn't give us enough time to go through all of the processes for processing the CAS, and then also give the student enough time to make a new visa application before that document expires. Also, any statement that is created from online banking, that must be printed and stamped by the bank on every page for verification. A pure digital copy downloaded directly from online banking, we cannot accept because they are vulnerable to editing. Okay, so similar to the bank statements, we also accept bank letters. Now, a bank letter can be accepted, providing that it shows all of the following details. So it must show the full account holder's name and full account number. So once again, no redacted account numbers and no abbreviations on the names. It must be printed on the bank's letter-headed paper. So that will show the bank name, the bank logo, and some form of contact details for the branch of the bank that issued this letter. It must confirm the minimum balance on the account over a period of at least 28 consecutive days. Also, in the case of fixed deposit accounts, we do ask that the letters confirm that the funds are available to withdraw at any time as well, just to make sure that it's not a specific type of fixed deposit account where the funds are actually inaccessible. Also, the date of the letter must be within 30 days of the student making a visa application. So for submitting to request a CAS, we ask them to be less than 2 weeks old, once again. Now, education loans can also be accepted, providing that the loan is part of an approved and regulated education loan scheme. The funds have to be fully available to the student before travelling to the UK. So the only condition that the letter can have on the disbursement of funds can be that the student has to provide a copy of their visa to the bank. If there are any other conditions, such as progress reports or periodic updates of any kind, then we do not accept those bank letters. Also, the loan letter must be valid and less than 90 days old at the time of the visa application and must be printed on the bank's letterheaded paper. So they must be valid and less than 90 days old unless the letter states anywhere that the loan offer or the letter is valid for a shorter period of time, in which case, obviously, it must be within that time period. And obviously, the loan letter has to be valid. It has to be an approved education loan. It cannot be confirmation of an application being submitted. Okay, so the next document is TB testing. So TB tests are valid for 6 months, and they must be valid at the time of the student arriving in the UK. Now, the test certificate must be issued by a UKVI approved clinic, and it must follow the format as given in the example below. The full list of UKVI approved clinics can be found at the UK government website with the link in this slide, and these slides will be shared with you later on. And then you just select the relevant country. If we believe there is not enough time for a student to obtain their visa and travel to the UK before their TB test certificate expires, then the students will be asked to provide a new one before the CAS is granted. So, for example, if we know that the student is applying from a country that we know does not have a priority or a super priority application service, then we know that obviously it takes time to issue the CAS. Then you have to, the visa application processing time can be anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks. And also then the student needs time to arrive in the UK. So a student in that kind of circumstance, if their TB test is expiring within 3 or 4 weeks, then we're not going to approve that TB test. We're going to ask for a new one to be provided. I know that during the pandemic times, these are difficult to obtain, and a lot of clinics will say that they won't actually issue the student with a new TB test certificate until their existing one expires. If that does happen, then please alert us of that so that we can discuss with the university partner if there are any adjustments or accommodations that can be made to accommodate the student. However, in some cases, a deferral may be necessary. And police registration. So, as I mentioned before, some visa holders are required as a condition of their entry clearance to register with the local police service. There are a variety of factors that could make this a condition, including their nationality or potentially if they have any criminal records. The visa holder is required to report to the police whenever there is any change in their contact details, and they also have to report to the police station within, I believe it's either 7 or 14 days of arriving in the UK. Their contact details, that includes their home address and their phone number. If they ever change those contact details whilst they are in the UK and they fail to notify the police, that is a criminal offence. And that's why, as sponsors of students, the university must have a copy of any previous police registration certificates for their records, even if it's previous visas where the university was not sponsoring them at the time. It's a legal requirement that we must have a copy of it. And obviously also as well, it's our responsibility to make sure that the student has kept it updated at all times. And because if they haven't, then it's a criminal offence. Now, the appearance and format of police registration certificates can vary slightly depending on police service. So if you're in any doubt over whether it's the right certificate or not, then please send a copy to us and we're happy to check it for you. Okay, so that's all of the content that we had for today. So thank you all who are here for attending today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to everything that we've had to offer to you. Obviously, if any of you have any questions regarding anything that's been covered in this presentation, then you have my email address and my colleagues, Christina and Eleni, who will be able to answer any questions that you may have. Let me just quickly check the chat box. And if anyone has any further questions, then please feel free to submit them now. If you can't think of any questions now, but do think of some later, then feel free to contact us or contact your account manager. Okay, so just looking at any questions that have come in. Does an outer London campus have a higher visa granted ratio? It doesn't, because UKVI have previously been suspicious of students choosing universities outside of London for that exact reason. So there's no greater or lesser risk associated with whether the campus is inside or outside of London or not. If the student gets their visa now, can they travel immediately? Well, so when the student gets their visa, they should check the validity dates. So, for example, right now, students would not be receiving visas for the September intake yet. So they would not be able to travel immediately, and then have to make sure that they're not traveling before their entry clearance visa in their passport is activated. They shouldn't travel before the issue date. And obviously they should travel before the expiry date. I guess that goes without saying. If they were for the May intake, and so they're currently studying online, yes, they would be able to travel immediately if they get the visa now, or if they already have the visa. If the visa is granted on September 20th or after September 20th, what should the student do? So check their CAS for the last enrollment date and check to see if they are able to book a flight before that expires, or before that last enrollment date reaches. If not, contact the university or contact us so that we can alert this to the university admissions and compliance teams, and then they will be able to determine if we can give the student more time to travel to the UK. So it's not the end of the world if they get their visa at the last minute. And if they do then get their visa late and then face delays in travel as well, then contact the university or contact us so we can contact the university, and we will try and find a solution to help that student.